The Duelpad Zen isn't going to surprise you. In terms of features and build quality, it easily fits in with the family of budget fighting game controllers saturating the market right now. It's the same acrylic sandwich design with the same strip-prone Chicago screws, running the same open source GP2040CE firmware. What makes it stand out are the small details that show careful consideration. The corners have been extended to make room for your wrists. Button rims surround the keycaps to create a feeling closer to traditional arcade buttons without compromising the hot swap functionality. The OLED status screen sports a small navigation cluster that can be used to configure options without a computer, and it rocks a split layout that actually makes sense. The split layout is my personal headliner, combining a WASD-style directional cluster with a set of thumb buttons that make it a viable option not only as a fighting game controller, but as a controller replacement. GP2040CE supports up to 4 remappable layouts, so you can swap between layouts to support different games. For 2D fighting games, I keep the 2 large thumb buttons as jump, keeping the advantages of a traditional hitbox layout, while allowing a more relaxed posture with more space between the movement and action buttons, and the smaller thumb buttons still free for extra functions. For other games, I leave the WASD cluster as my main movement, with the thumb buttons replacing the shoulder buttons, triggers, or thumbstick clicks, leaving the pinky column for action buttons, free for additional functions or modifiers. For example, here I've mapped the thumb buttons to the shoulders and triggers, leaving the 4 face buttons in the first 2 columns, followed by the L3 and R3 buttons, with the pinky column used to switch the directionals to D-pad and right stick movements. It works for both 2D and 3D games, as long as they don't rely on the right stick for aiming or frequent camera adjustments. As a practical example, here's Mega Man 11. I use this setup to quickly switch weapons with the right stick, leaving 2 extra buttons available to map shortcut buttons. And in DMC4, this allows me to quickly perform multi-button maneuvers while charging projectile weapons, and quickly adjust the camera or switch styles by using the modifiers. This setup even works for rhythm games. The tactile feedback and thumb buttons work great for DJ Max, and you can even set up twin stick or mirrored WASD setups for games like Project Diva or Theatrhythm. Let's talk about that OLED. These tiny screens are quickly becoming a killer feature of modern controllers, allowing you to easily check your buttons and settings. The Duelpad Zen takes this one step further and allows you to change the settings directly on the screen itself. What I initially assumed was an extra button turned out to be a full navigation cluster, allowing you to cycle through various settings from an onboard menu without the need to connect it to a computer. You can change the console mode, D-pad settings, RGB lighting, and even the extra button mappings through the menu. In its current state, it's unfortunately a bit finicky. At least with my configuration, the menu seems to only operate when I'm in the first profile, and frequently freezes after swapping to another profile, until restarted. On the other side of the menu are the RGB underglow controls. With them you can cycle through various lighting modes, though they seem to be controlled separately from the rest of the controller, with no dynamic modes that react to button presses. The top side RGB can be controlled through the menu or web config, with a lot more flexibility for customization. My problem is that these LEDs are blindingly bright, with even the lowest of the multiple settings being bright enough to distract you from your game. I really can't see these as useful for anything except blinding your opponent. In terms of customization, the dense layout doesn't leave much room for art in the center, but the sides provide ample space for details. A paper layer is pre-installed in the controller, and makes a good template for cutting your own art should you choose to do it by hand, like I did. The Duelpad Zen has plenty of small issues that give a sense of jank to what's otherwise a well-considered device. But none of these issues got in the way when it was time to play. Setting up could be troublesome, but once I dialed in my settings and got into a game, the Zen was rarely less than a joy to play with. The layout is well spaced and comfortable, the button rims add a sense of stability other controllers lack, and the quiet, fast response switches translated inputs with satisfying feedback. Whether I played fighting games, platformers, or rhythm games, the Zen felt up to the task. With its novel form factor and button layout, I can easily see it staying in my controller rotation, even with many more high-end competitors.